So this was a chapter 8. This was a chapter that I think had some difficult case examples to read about, and some difficult pictures to see. Um, it's called Trapped in Relationships, the Cost of Abuse and Neglect. And so he walks us through one case example where the client was exhibiting a lot of severe symptomology. So, for instance, she met somebody playing tennis and hadn't dated anybody for 5 years, and eventually invited him over, and they just fell asleep. And the person brushed her leg or something in the middle of the night just by accident, and she attacked him, and he ran out of the residence. But this brought her to counseling, but she didn't actually remember the early abuse. She had repressed those memories. And you know, one of the things that he asked her to do was to draw a picture of her childhood. And we get a pretty scary picture in the book. And, this is where he referred to a poem by W.H. Auden, and two lines in it reads, "Truth, like love and sleep, resents approaches that are too intense." And so he recognized by seeing this picture that she drew that her childhood was traumatic, most likely filled with abuse, probably sexual abuse or incest. And so a therapist's natural inclination would be, wow, this is a fascinating picture. I'm going to ask about this. But instead, he felt that because the memories of this were repressed, and it was such a traumatic scene in the picture, that he would take things much more slowly in therapy. And obviously that was a good choice. A lot of times individuals experience unexplainable reactions to events. It could be as simple as in meeting somebody and having some type of transference and not understanding why there are feelings about somebody they just met, when there's no reason for them, no foundation for them. She began cutting, and that eventually scared her because it came more often, and she started cutting more deeply. And we talked about cutting in a previous class, and how it might be related to the cycle of addiction and the addictive curve and things like that. But one of the interesting things that I didn't know about exactly, I knew that so this client had trouble seeing eventually. And through testing, she discovered that she had an autoimmune disease. Now, I've known that stress, extreme stress, often results in or exacerbates autoimmune diseases. And it could be a combination of many autoimmune diseases are started by a virus that an individual doesn't realize they're sick, but the body's immune response gets triggered, heightened stress continues that, and it begins attacking one's own body rather than a virus that's no longer there. Different forms of flu viruses have often been associated with this. But stress does exacerbate it. One of the studies that he started because he realized that a number of clients that he had been seeing who had experienced abuse earlier in their lives also were diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. So, correlation doesn't always equal causation, but he thought it was worth investigating. And he did find that the actual immune cells were different in individuals who had been abused versus individuals who had not been abused. And it's almost as if they were on heightened alert, just like their brains were on heightened alert. So in patients with histories of incest, a proportion of RA cells, there's RORA, cells that are ready to pounce is larger than normal. This makes the immune system oversensitive to threat. So it's almost like the immune system is also stuck in fight or flight response. And, so it's prone to mount a defense when none's needed at all. And if there's no virus or bacteria or anything like that to fight, it means attacking the body's own cells. And stress exacerbates this. And if we think about this kind of a metaphorical, big picture way, and we look at this case, there's so many similarities on so many different layers. So here we see she was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. So at a cellular level, her body's attacking herself. She was cutting herself. She's physically attacking herself. She is basically pushing what could be a healthy relationship away because she physically attacked her date. And emotionally, she's attacking herself. She's thinking, why am I like this? Well, I haven't dated anybody in 5 years. Going to ask this guy to come over, but he doesn't really know who I am. So already attacking herself emotionally and downgrading who she is as an individual. So on so many different levels, there is this self-blame or self-criticism that, I see in so many individuals who have been abused at a very early age. So, as it says, as children, we start off at the center of our own universe where we interpret everything that happens from an egocentric vantage point. If our parents or grandparents keep telling us we're the cutest, greatest things in the world, we don't question their judgment. It must be exactly that. Deep down, no matter what else we learn about ourselves, we'll carry that sense with us that we're basically adorable. As a result, if we later hook up with somebody who treats us badly, we'll be outraged. It won't feel right. It's not familiar. It's not like what they experienced at home. But if we're abused or ignored in childhood, or grow up in a family where sexuality is treated with disgust, our inner map contains a different message. Our sense of self is marked by contempt and humiliation. We are more likely to think he or she has my number and fail to protest if we are mistreated. And so many individuals stay in unhealthy relationships, and this cycle of abuse continues. It's why it takes a minimum of 7 times on average to get out of an abusive relationship. So, this perception of self is so tied with our personal identity, or perhaps a lack of personal identity because of abuse. So I think the second part of this chapter is pretty interesting because he's wondering, okay, how do we go about helping her create a genuine identity, to, think more positively, or to even remember and process those early events. And that might be possible or it might not be possible, depending upon the age the abuse occurred. So, if abuse or neglect or physical, emotional, sexual abuse happened at a really early age, like 4 or below, the individual may never remember it. But above the age of 4, it is possible to bring back repressed memories. And like he was talking about, it's not so much by cognitive behavioral therapy or REBT or confronting irrational thoughts. That actually places them in a negative space. Like, why am I even thinking that? I'm such a stupid person. It also places them in an environment that is not safe. So this person is not accepting me for who I am as I am. This person is debating my irrational beliefs. And I actually feel worse as a result of it. And so taking this stance of relational empathy and all of those basic Rogerian concepts, like we talked about in the textbook, it builds a safe place. It builds a trusting environment. And I think there's always a time that if growth occurs or if positive change occurs, the therapist may not even know what causes it, but it's usually something that they say that is genuine and empathic, and it's something that touches the client in a positive emotional way. So in this case, he said, "I'm really worried about you." And the client was thinking, it's like, wow, I'm a human being that deserves worry. And that was kind of what began this process of change that eventually led to flashbacks and, images in her mind, and eventually being able to process the abuse. So if abuse occurs in childhood, many times individuals do not want to be in that situation. Who would? And so they often go to a different mental state. So, for instance, they might fixate on something. It could be their watch, it could be the wallpaper, it could be the ceiling, who knows what it is, but they fixate on something with their eyes. And mentally, they separate from their physical body. And it's almost as if they are looking down on the scene that is occurring. And the person who is experiencing that horrific thing, that abuse, is no longer them. they are not the person that they are viewing externally. And so separating like that is not only a separation of a cognitive mental state, but it also allows them to dissociate emotionally. So they are no longer connected feeling to that individual who's experiencing the abuse. So as a result, that separation, both cognitively, with their personal identity and emotionally, may stick with them. And they may never go back to integration until they process these things through therapy. And so they don't feel the same way. They don't experience interactions the same way, not fully. It's almost as if they might explain it as if they're no longer in their body. So they cannot experience positive things fully either. So I think he gives a really nice example of how this what occurred with his client and how it was processed. And it's like hating your home, your kitchen, and your pots and pans, your bed, your chairs, your table, your rugs. Nothing feels safe, least of all your own body. And so you no longer want to reside in that space, either cognitively or emotionally. All right. Questions or comments about that chapter?
So I'm one of those art therapist folks you were talking